Hey everyone, Ranger William here from the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail, bringing you part 3 of our series, Protected Us from All Harm. This is the conclusion of our series looking at the story of Bethabara and the prisoners captured at Kings Mountain on October 7th, 1780. This force of several hundred Patriot guards and prisoners arrived here in what is now Historic Bethabara Park in Winston-Salem, North Carolina on October 23rd. We have seen these men gathered into fenced-off pastures, some of the provincials housed in some of the homes in town. We have seen some assaults, we have seen theft, we have seen all attempts by Patriot officers and town leaders to try and keep the peace here in this pacifist community of the United Brethren Church, or the Moravian Church. This is going to be part 3 of our series, The Fruits of Victory. Now, with so many changing of guards and the coming and going here of town, sometimes the guards would get a little bit relaxed and escape was possible for these loyalist prisoners. One of the provincial officers who's held here records in his journal later on that on November 5th, he and 3 others are going to rather choose to take the risk of escape than to stay here as a prisoner, and he said be slowly starved or possibly executed. On November 8th, news is going to arrive finally from General Horatio Gates of the Southern Continental Army, the long-awaited orders of what to do with these prisoners. It's going to arrive here and tell the prisoners that they are to be marched to the lead mines in southwest Virginia. Now, the Moravian diaries note that the prisoners were, quote, much perturbed by the news, quote, and even with the extra guards placed around these enclosures, placed around the homes, there are still going to be plenty of escapes. It's said that nearly 20 of them, meaning the provincial soldiers in town, nearly 20 escaped the night after receiving this news. Now, escape wasn't the only way for these prisoners to get out of Bethabara. One big option for many of them is going to be enlistment. The offer is going to be made to the loyalist militia that if they join the Continental Army for a certain number of months or years, that will serve as their punishment. Some of these men take up the offer in great numbers. It's recorded at one point that he says, quote, the militia, most of them enlisted in the Continental service rather than suffer death by inches, starving with cold and hunger. End quote. And cold it was. The Moravian town diary here records that there was a raw and cold weather in early November. The Moravians also noted that the North Carolina militia, the North Carolina loyalists who agree to this service, are allowed a brief furlough to go to their homes nearby, to get some rest, some food, and do their laundry before reporting back for 6 months of service in the Continental Army. Now, this highlight of this note of laundry kind of leads us to believe that the prisoners during this entire stay here, during their captivity, are not being provided that essential service of clean clothes to prevent disease. Now, one loyalist prisoner, a man named Bob Powell, is recorded as finding another way to maybe escape his captivity. It's recorded by Lyman Draper in the 19th century that Powell described as, quote, of unusual size, strong, supple, and powerful, quote, he actually proposed to the Patriot officers that if they pick any man in their army to go one-on-one with Powell in a fight, in kind of a wrestling contest, if Powell won, he would be granted his freedom, and if he lost, he would agree to be executed. The Patriot leaders accept his proposition, and even though they address the entire force of Patriot guards, even offering a cash award to any man who steps forward, not a single guard thought himself capable of taking on Bob Powell. Now, by the time the prisoners leave Bethabara, it's recorded that not a single North Carolina loyalist was left in their numbers. Not a single North Carolina militiaman was still in captivity. This is a combination of the men taking that offer of continental service, those who know the area nearby being able to escape, but also being near their home jurisdictions, being taken by civil authorities to be tried as criminals rather than as prisoners of war. This means that the remaining force of loyalist prisoners are going to be almost entirely the South Carolina militia and the loyalist provincials, men from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Now, this offer of continental service is still offered to the South Carolina loyalists. And it's recorded in the town diary that at one point 140 South Carolina loyalists are going to take that offer of continental service. They're going to spend their first night of freedom, is described as camped in the square of Bethabara, baking bread and preparing for their journey to join the Continental Army, which is camped nearby in Salisbury, North Carolina. The Moravians described them as having, quote, a pitiful appearance, most of them having no clothes on their bodies, end quote. Now, this practice of allowing the prisoners to join the American Army is actually going to infuriate Continental Army General Nathaniel Greene when he hears about this after taking command in December of 1780, noting that these prisoners, they could have been exchanged with the British, or at least attempted to be exchanged, to free American prisoners, patriots, who are being held by the British in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, what makes the situation even worse is that it's later reported that many of these militia who agree to serve in the Continental Army later desert and are able to rejoin Loyalist regiments in the British Army and continue fighting against the Patriots. Light Horse Harry Lee, the Continental Cavalry Colonel, talks about this. He says in January of 1781, it's found that about 200 of these former prisoners are back in arms against the Americans, and only 60 are remaining in captivity at the jail in Salisbury. He says that the North Carolinians, quote, have in a great degree baffled the fruits of victory. Now, on November 10th, 1780, the Bethabara Diary is going to record that, quote, it gave us much pleasure to see the soldiers march away, though we were very sorry for the poor men who are in great need, end quote. For 19 days, the Patriot Army and their Loyalist prisoners have occupied the town of Bethabara. Now, from here, the Army is going to march just a few miles down the road to Salem, North Carolina, a larger town of the Moravians, and they're going to wait there, the officers at least, for about 10 days before continuing their journey on to captivity in Salisbury with the Continental Army. Now, despite the few altercations and thefts that happened during this occupation, the Moravians found themselves relatively unscathed from this period. The Bethabara Diary notes these thoughts when it says, quote, we thanked the dear Savior who has helped us through these trying times and protected us from all harm, end quote. So here at Historic Bethabara Park, you can see some of the remains of this 18th century town, as well as some restored structures and a few reconstructions, giving you a better idea of what this town looked like in the middle and late 18th century and early 19th century, including the period when this was home to the Patriot victors of Kings Mountain and their hundreds of Loyalist prisoners. And that concludes part 3 of our series, Protected Us from All Harm, examining the story of this occupation, sharing a little lesser known part of the aftermath of the Battle of Kings Mountain. So I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned a little bit about our story, and I hope you watch the other 2 episodes as well. So this is Ranger William from the Overmountain Victory Trail saying thanks for watching.